Look, let's just jump right into the harsh, unforgiving reality of hazardous area classification, or HAC. You can spend absolutely thousands of hours calculating fluid dynamics, perfecting your dispersion models, and selecting the absolute best intrinsically safe hardware on the market, but honestly, all of that brilliant physics and engineering means literally nothing to a regulatory auditor or a classification society if it isn't captured correctly on paper.
If it's not on paper, it doesn't count. It really is that simple. When an inspector from ABS or Bureau Veritas walks onto an offshore platform, they're not going to ask you to recite the math from memory, right? They want to see the paperwork. According to standards like IEC 60079 and API Recommended Practice 505, this core documentation set is the only thing that makes your hazardous area classification real, traceable, and defensible. It's the definitive blueprint that every single downstream decision relies on.
So let's break this down into three main pillars, starting with Pillar 1, HAC drawings, which are all about visualizing the risk.
These drawings translate invisible, abstract danger into clear spatial boundaries. Basically, they map out the hazardous envelopes against the actual physical layout of your facility. Typically, you'll see Zone 0 color-coded in red, Zone 1 in an orange crosshatch, and Zone 2 in yellow. But crucially, and the IEC and Offshore standards are really specific about this, these can't just be flat, top-down maps. They absolutely must include both plan and section views. Why? Well, hydrocarbon gases have buoyancy. Some are heavier than air and they sink, while others are lighter and rise. So you need those vertical elevations to show the true three-dimensional extent of the zones above and below the decks, as well as mapping out things like ventilation openings, obstacles, and airlocks. Basically, anyone should be able to look at this visual record and know exactly what is allowed where.
Moving right along to Pillar 2, Source of Release Schedules.
Now, a colored drawing is fantastic, but it's just the end result. We need the actual mathematical evidence to back it up. We can't just go drawing arbitrary yellow circles on a floor plan and call it a day, right? The source of release schedule is essentially that detailed mathematical evidence trail. For every single potential leak point, whether that's a flange, a valve, a pump seal, there is a specific line item. It tracks the equipment's tag number, the exact fluid composition, the operating pressure, and the release grade, which just tells us if the release is continuous, primary, or secondary. And based on API 505 and IEC guidelines, this schedule also pulls in data like flash points, vapor density, and auto-ignition temperatures. All of this data gets churned through equations to spit out that final all-important column, the hazard radius. That 3-meter radius calculated for a specific tag, that is exactly what dictates the size of the colored envelope on your drawings. The visual boundaries and the mathematical schedule are directly tethered to one another.
And that brings us to Pillar 3, the Ex-Equipment Register.
Okay, so once the risk is mapped out visually and mathematically, we have to deal with the physical hardware actually installed in these zones to make sure it doesn't become an ignition source. This register, which you might also hear called the X-Schedule, is where those theoretical zones meet the gritty, physical reality of the plant hardware. If a piece of electrical equipment is sitting inside one of those colored envelopes, it absolutely must appear on this list. It tracks all the critical data: the equipment tag, its ingress protection or IP rating, the specific explosion protection type, like XD for flameproof or XE for increased safety. It even lists the independent certifying body like PTB, CSA, or FM approvals, along with the required gas group and temperature class. The so what here is that when an inspector conducts an audit, they're going to stand out on the deck, look at the physical nameplate riveted to a motor, and cross-reference it line by line with this exact register. A single mismatch means a failed audit.
Which leads us perfectly into the core conflict, the danger of version drift.
Individually, these three pillars are incredibly complex, but the most catastrophic administrative failures actually don't happen because one of these documents is missing outright. The real danger comes from version drift. Picture this scenario. A process modification occurs. The facility goes through a standard management of change, or MOC process. The drafting team meticulously updates the HAC drawing to revision C to reflect a new wider Zone 2 area caused by higher process pressures. But wait, the electrical engineering team doesn't update the Ex-Equipment Register. It's still sitting at revision 8. Suddenly, you've got a massive conflict. The drawing dictates one thing, the equipment register dictates another, and the actual physical plant is out there doing a third thing entirely. The documents are no longer providing a unified defense, they're telling three slightly different lies.
Think about these three documents like a patient's medical profile in a hospital. You've got the patient's chart, their prescription list, and their allergy wristband. Now, each document might have been perfectly accurate at the exact time it was written. But if they fall out of sync, say the chart orders a medication, but nobody updated it to reflect the new allergy listed on the wristband, a nurse administers the wrong drug, and the patient gets seriously hurt. A mismatch on an offshore rig is exactly the same thing. If the drawing dictates a Zone 1 requirement, but an outdated X register allowed the installation of lower-rated Zone 2 hardware, well, you've now got an active ignition source sitting right in a highly explosive gas cloud.
And that brings us to the absolute golden rule of hazardous area classification paperwork. 3 documents, 1 story, always. Rigorous document control is not just annoying administrative red tape. Keeping a single master revision log and ensuring these 3 deliverables are cross-referenced and synchronized is quite literally a life-saving safety control. So let's do a quick check to see how this interconnected logic works in a real-world scenario. Let's say a facility undergoes a process modification. A brand new pump with its own mechanical seal is added into the system. That seal is a new source of release. Now obviously, the physical HAC drawing has to be updated to show the new colored zone around that pump. But what are the other 2 documents that must be updated alongside it?
Well, to keep everything in sync, first we have to update the source of release schedule. That means adding the new pump's tag number, the fluid data, the release grade, and calculating the exact hazard radius that justifies that new circle on the drawing. Then, for step 2, the X equipment register has to be updated. That new pump is going to have a motor and probably a nearby electrical junction box. Those newly installed devices need to be logged with their IP ratings, protection types, and T-classes. All 3 pillars are physically locked together, guys. They must move and revise as a single unit every single time a change occurs.
So, you now know the 3 core deliverables that make your hazardous area classification real: the visual drawings, the mathematical release schedules, and the physical X equipment registers. But more importantly, you understand exactly why keeping them perfectly synchronized through strict management of change is critical to preventing an absolute disaster. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If an auditor walked onto your facility today and pulled a random revision, would your 3 documents tell one unified defensible story or 3 different lies? It might be time to check your paperwork. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and stay safe out there.